This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to another episode of Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast only on the Film Stories Podcast Network. As you've probably already guessed by my dulcet tones, I am neither Kurt nor am I Mark. I am Matt Latham, which probably means you've guessed already, it's another special. This is going to be one that's in between our coverage of 11 and 12. In fact, this is probably going to the first and only time it's ever going to happen. There's actually 2 episodes of the podcast being recorded at the same time. So I think Carl, Mark and Kurt are recording the first batch of the series 12. So yeah, we're nearly at the end. It's kind of weird, but I'll let those lot talk about that kind of existential crisis that they're going to be having. But instead, I'm feeding Mark's desire for more specials, and as usual, we just try and jump on anything that is Red Dwarf related, and this is probably one of the bigger ones actually. Not Red Dwarf related. We're swapping Deep Space, Lager and Vindaloo's for rum, chicken and chips as we fly over to the Caribbean, to the fictional island of St. Marie to talk about the BBC massive global hit, Death in Paradise. Starring, of course, Danny John Jules, who you know as the Cat. But unlike a fish out of water British detective inspector, I am not alone. I have with me writer, stand-up comedian, podcast editor and dog lover, Jade Gebbie, onto the podcast. Jade, how are you doing this evening?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am very, very good, thank you. So, Jade, do you want to briefly introduce yourself to the Shipwrecked Comatose listeners?
Yes, hi. So I am Jade. I have recently started a Death in Paradise podcast called Pod in Paradise. So I'm basically using it as an excuse to rewatch Death in Paradise because I kind of realised that I absolutely loved it, and then I thought, there must be lots of other people who do, and there are because millions of people watch it. So I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to chat about it, and it's been really fun to rewatch the episodes because I've forgotten most of them in terms of the specifics. So it's been really fun to kind of go through them and pick up different things and Easter eggs and stuff like that.
I started not rewatch. I started binging it the start of this year. So basically, the first episode of it I ever watched was the Christmas special from last year, and that was mainly because I was pretty much in Kent in a premiering, and so me and my mum and dad had travelled down to Kent to go and see my sister and my nephew, who was about 4 months old at the time, so it was his first Christmas. And we pretty much finished Christmas Day very early, so I was pretty much in a hotel room for about 8 p.m. and I just started watching Death in Paradise. It's always been something that was on the kind of cusp of some watching. I'm pretty sure I might have tried to watch the first episode on iPlayer a couple of years ago, and then I just ended up sitting and watching through all of it. Quite enjoyed it, and then just thought, you know what, I'll give it another go and watch it, and then ended up pretty much binging it over the course of a few months, to the point where it was the only thing I was watching.
After you watched the Christmas episode, did you go back right to the start, or did you go to sort of the start of the series that was before the Christmas episode you watched?
I went from the start. I'm a kind of TV completionist. That
is exactly me as well. Not to bring in another TV show, but basically for years I have sort of refused to watch Doctor Who, even though I knew that it would be the kind of show that I would love, because I am a completist, and I was like, I'm never going to be able to watch it all because there's missing episodes. So I just was putting it off for ages, but then instead I've decided to be a completist from the Christopher Eccleston, and I've had to just cope with that. But I feel your feelings with that, because I am definitely a completist as well.
Yeah, I've never seen any of the kind of pre 2005 era Doctor Who, but so I kind of decided, I'm not going to get into that, because that was my entry point. I'll tell a lie, I did watch in 96 the TV movie with Paul McGann with no context of what was going on at all. So I can think of that, but talking about Doctor Who, shout out to the TARDIS crew, Ben and Baz has been on talking about quite a few, been on the podcast a couple of times. So on the Film Stories Network, brother podcast or whatever, TARDIS crew, go and listen to that if you can. Yeah, we are going to be talking about Death in Paradise, and as the Shipwrecked Comatose way, it's because there's a Red Dwarf cast member involved, and at this point it's Danny John Jules who plays the character, and I really wish that I recorded Mark's reaction to when we told him the name of Danny John Jules' character, because it's another character called Dwayne, and Mark was like, what? He's called Dwayne? Yeah, me and Colin were like, yep, he's playing a second character called Dwayne.
Two very different Dwaynes, aren't they?
Yes, and we'll be talking a lot about kind of the character of Dwayne and Danny John Jules element in that. But I think before we do that, I think one of the reasons I think one I think it was kind of like when Mark found a Coronation Street podcast and talked about Craig Charles in Coronation Street. It was like, we remember trying to find for ages, like, kind of like, is there a Death in Paradise podcast? And there was like nothing for a while, and then suddenly Mark just found Pod in Paradise. I was like, yes. And then we suddenly found you talking about Red Dwarf on TikTok, and I was like, Mark was like, Mark, I think we found a guest. And I was like, yeah,
got that crossover.
Yeah. Pretty much like any time there's anyone new on the podcast, we have to sit them down and sit the Red Dwarf office exam, and which is basically 6 questions that we ask guests just about the Red Dwarf fandom and their history with the show. So the first question, Jade, when did you first discover Red Dwarf, or what was your first memory of the show?
So, I mean, I'm a big comedy fan. I mean, I do stand-up comedy and I write comedy, but I've always been into comedy, particularly British sitcoms. And I do remember watching bits of, like, having seen Red Dwarf and being aware of it when I was younger, but I don't specifically remember kind of when I had seen those episodes. But maybe about 10 years ago, or maybe even a bit less than that, maybe about 7 years, I was dog sitting for a dog in the village that I grew up in, and so I was spending a lot of time obviously out walking the dog, but if I wasn't walking the dog, I was kind of in the house that the dog lived in, and I was kind of staying there. So I used it as a time to kind of watch stuff that maybe I hadn't seen before. So my proper memory of the show, of like literally binging it and just watching it and being sort of like, I can't believe it's taken me so long to properly watch it, even though I had seen it and was aware of it before. And that sort of, I basically, watching Red Dwarf makes me think of like dog sitting. So it's got a very sweet kind of feelings for me, because I think of this lovely cute dog and just like being nice and cozy in a nice house and stuff like that. But I absolutely sort of binged it as quickly as you can binge something, because it's so up my street and I really loved it. Like I said, I was surprised at myself and kind of disappointed at myself that it had taken so long.
Okay, so how did you watch it then? Was it like DVDs? Was it on iPlayer or Dave back then? No?
Yeah, so it was on iPlayer, although I suppose the newer ones were on Dave. But yeah, it was an iPlayer thing even then, and yeah, just absolutely sort of, as soon as one finished, it was like, you know, when it comes up with watch next or like next in 5 seconds, it's like, yep, bring it on straight away.
So, and you started from, like, as we were talking about completionism, we started from like series 1 onwards.
Yes.
And
Yeah, definitely.
So what would you say is your favourite episode?
So this is such a hard question, because I was sort of using my excitement about coming on this podcast as a way to rewatch Red Dwarf for another time, and I've been like rewatching some episodes which I knew that I loved, so it was so hard to decide which one, but there were quite a few up for kind of first prize, as it were, but in the end I decided to go for Parallel Universe.
Oh, okay.
Because I think it's such a good episode, because having we sort of see or meet the female Holly for the first time, but as Hilly. And I thought the dog character was really funny, and just having those female versions of the characters were brilliant. And also as well, obviously the opening with singing Tongue Tied is sort of a classic moment.
Okay, yeah, that's good. I don't think anyone's mentioned Parallel Universe, but you get props from me for choosing a Series 2 episode. Series 2 is one of my favourites. I think it's my personal favourite, even though I think objectively 5 might be mine I think. But
Right, yeah.
yeah, talking about my favorite series. What's your favorite series?
Well, so again, there were a few up for sort of first prize. 2 definitely was up there, because I think I sort of always find with sitcoms that, like, often the first series is good and the first series of Red Dwarf was brilliant, but I kind of feel if it's a sitcom that kind of runs and runs, the second series, the characters all get into their stride and they've kind of like all settled into how they should be and that kind of thing. So 2 was kind of up there, but also 3 was it sort of, for me, it was sort of between 2, 3 and 4. Like those earlier series I really like. And yeah, maybe 2 or 3, but one thing about me is I'm extremely indecisive.
But yeah, I'm gonna take the win for number 2 for series 2. So I think yeah,
Oh yeah, I do.
Series 2. I think perhaps, yeah, I've always got a soft spot series 2, and I think I said, like, I think there's an objective favourite and a subjective favourite. I think sometimes, like, where you try and, like, it's probably the same with anything, I think, where you say, objectively, I can see that this episode, series, show, film, album, whatever, is objectively good, but I subjectively quite like this one because I've just got personal attachment to it. It's a series.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like, it's series 2 and 3, Buffy. I think, okay, I can see series 3 is probably the best series of the show, season of the show, but I've got a massive soft spot for season 2, even though there's a few more weak episodes in it.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So yeah, who's your favourite character?
Well, not to be sort of biased to Death in Paradise, but genuinely Cat is my favourite character. I do find it hard to decide again because I'm really bad at making decisions, but I found it quite hard to decide between him and Lister. I really, really like Lister as a character, and obviously they're all really funny, like Rimmer's hilarious, but I just love with Cat how he's quite a 3D character in terms of, like, he is very selfish, he's very arrogant, he's very self-obsessed, but he's so endearing and he's like super sweet, and you just kind of, I feel kind of a attachment to him, and you know, I just think he's really, really cute and quite, like, obviously quite childlike at times, and so I quite like he's not just a selfish, arrogant character, because even though I do think Rimmer is brilliant, sometimes he's so sort of mean to the others or that kind of thing, whereas Cat's got a few more nuances maybe.
Oh yeah, I can hear Mark fist pump in the air with the cat love at the moment. So he's absolutely obsessed with the cat. But yeah, so do you have a favourite moment in this show's entire run? So, like, just a scene, moment, a line, is the one that stands out as like one of your favourites?
I think that, well, there was, in terms of a line, watching, I can't remember which episode I can't remember the name of the episode, but it's the episode where they lose like 4 days I think it's actually called Memory or something like that, where they lose 4 days of their memory, and then they're talking about the cake that I think it's this episode, maybe I've got that wrong, but basically Lister has baked a cake for Rimmer for his death day, and it's the shape of a spanner because he was a mechanic, and then Holly's like, oh, so if he was a postman, would you make a envelope? And then and Lister's like, yeah, and so then Holly goes, oh, well, lucky he wasn't a gynecologist, and I think that's such a good joke.
Yeah, that episode's Thanks for the Memory, and that is actually my favourite episode of the whole show.
Oh, really?
I love that, yeah. I think, yeah. I think it's one of the, particularly in that time, particularly in that period of the show where it's a bit more character focused, and I think it's one of the probably the best examples of the show kind of just doing a very sci-fi light episode, and it covers the characters of Rimmer and Lister and their relationship perfectly. So, yeah,
definitely.
So you've won Mark over with the cat love, and you've won me over with the choosing something from Thanks for the Memory, because I'll defend that episode to the death. And the final question is the final question that we ask everyone, which we've got down as mystery question. So he's basically, would you like some toast?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, okay. I was expecting you to say no. I don't know how to reply to that.
Oh, no. That makes me think of the bit where Rimmer is trying out his trying out like a chat up line on Lister, and everything that it's the worm do line, and everything that Lister says is not the right reply, and it's getting him really flustered.
And yeah, that's from Parallel Universe as well. I think it's the worm do line.
Yes, yeah,
Because
exactly.
I think I can't remember the name of the female version, because the female Rimmer tries to use it on Arnold as well. So
yeah.
But yeah, so we'll cut up onto the Red Dwarf stuff, and it's time to come back to Earth and head over to Saint Marie to talk about Death in Paradise. Possibly, I think, with the exception of perhaps Doctor Who and possibly, actually, I think globally, probably Doctor Who's probably the only bigger show. It's globally, it's probably one of the bigger franchises that the BBC has. I think if you was going to like just the UK, you probably argue like EastEnders is probably slightly bigger, but globally, I think Death in Paradise is one of the massive like franchises that isn't sci-fi, and it's quite, and it's a very simple premise, isn't it? It's like a fish out of water kind of British detective gets lumped in to quite uncomfortable, like very tropical, like fish out of water kind of thing, and and very just light-hearted murder mysteries. And I mean, do you have any ideas of perhaps why do you think it's captured the audience the way it has, or?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, that, because I've kind of wondered that quite a bit. And I think, I mean, I'm a big, like, all kind of cozy crime. So before I got into Death in Paradise, I still am a big fan of Midsummer Murders, but I really loved Midsummer Murders, and I love Poirot and all those kind of shows. And I think maybe, and possibly it's not this, but I feel like if most people are kind of feeling the same as me, it's got the like drama and the stakes that you want in a TV show to kind of care about it. So it's got some level of stakes to it. But personally, I find proper true crime, or like stuff that's really bleak, like just too much, because it's like, you know, out in the world there's lots of horrible stuff going on, so you kind of want to forget about that. And I feel these kind of shows kind of have that mix of, okay, there's enough drama and enough dramatic moments, but even though people are dying in it, you don't often see how they die, or if you do, it's not like gruesome or graphic or anything like that. And so maybe generally that's why people like that show. But then with Death in Paradise, I think it is, I mean, I guess they time it really well, because it comes out a lot of the time in the winter, and then it is that really bright sunny backdrop. So as well as having the crime element, you've got the beautiful backdrop of Saint Marie.
Yeah, I think there's something to what you say there. I think like if you compare it to something like Line of Duty, or quite a lot of particularly the current kind of like Sunday night dramas that have been showing up on the BBC, particularly, I ended up binging all in one day, all of Night Sleeper, which is basically absolute action fluff.
Yeah,
but that's got elements of drama in it. Whereas like Line of Duty, you kind of tense, whereas with Death in Paradise, I can't remember feeling. There's perhaps one or two moments, I think, where you kind of feel tense, because you don't know feel tense when it's the rare episodes where it kind of shakes up the status quo. But I think there's a very strong, very rigid formula. So like you know what to expect and everything, and then it becomes kind of cozy, kind of escapism.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. It's like, you know that there will definitely be a death at the start, and then possibly about 3/4 of the way through there will probably be another one. And also I think as well, the fact that the B plot is always something quite amusing, or, you know, quite silly, then that kind of brings a bit of levity to it. And also I think, and I don't know if anyone else who this is why people like that show, but for me, sometimes I find with those dark ITV dramas, which are often really well done and really well acted and everything, and really well written, but a lot of the time it's like a woman has been murdered or a child has been abducted. And with Death in Paradise, as I'm doing this rewatch, I'm sort of just kind of mentally keeping a note. And at the moment, it sort of feels quite balanced in terms of gender, of like who gets killed but also who the murderers are. So it's like, it doesn't feel like every episode, oh, there's another woman who's killed by her husband or that kind of thing. Not to get too sort of bleak, but I think that kind of makes it a bit easier to watch.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of brain switch offy. I don't. There's probably a better term for it. I don't use the word moving wallpaper, because moving wallpaper is something that's usually kind of just on in the background as like comfort stuff, but you're not really paying attention. Like, I think it's, you could argue it's like if someone is a massive Office fan, will probably just, who's watched it about 10 times, will stick the Office on in the background as part of comfort, but then it becomes moving wallpaper that you're not actually focused on. Whereas I think Death in Paradise, you will sit and watch it, but there's just something quite comforting in that there's characters, very likable characters. It's very kind of nice. You know what to expect. It's not gonna kind of shock you. It's not gonna make you feel like tense and uncomfortable or anything. So whereas like if you're watching it, like I said earlier, Line of Duty, where you actually kind of feeling quite tense, which valid reasons to watch something, but perhaps you don't kind of, particularly if you've got work the next day.
Exactly.
Like on a Sunday evening, you kind of want to watch something light and breezy just to kind of wind down.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Sorry, particularly in the winter, as you said earlier. So like it's kind of like still kind of like dark cold. Yeah, it's just like the tea cozy of the tea cozy of BBC drama.
Yeah, I like that. The tea cozy of BBC drama. They should use that as their tagline. But yeah, I think as well, you know that you can sit down and watch it with pretty much anyone in the family, probably not really young kids, but you could watch it, you know, from teenagers up to like, you know, a 90-year-old nan, and you could sit down and watch it and know that you don't have to worry about maybe there being a sex scene or there being bad language or that kind of thing, or anything that might make an awkward feeling, you know, when you're sat around watching TV with your family and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think, and again, there's a very old-fashioned kind of traditional kind of crime kind of formula / like trope. It's full of kind of like very tropey stuff and hits a lot of structural plot beats, and there's very much like a very Agatha Christie influenced elements of it, and I think, and it's very kind of hyper reality in places where like if you sit down and think of it, like nothing makes sense. Like for example, like it seems like on this island, which is supposed to be the size of like Guadeloupe or where it's filmed, that there's only like 4 members of the police department, like covering 24-hour type thing. Yeah, and
yet they always finish at the end of the day, so it's not even like they're doing 24-hour shifts as well.
But then like episodes will start, and you've got like either Dwayne or whoever his assistant is, like Marlon or Fidel or something like that, and like they'll be like, it'll be like about 3 a.m, and then they turn up fully in uniform, and it doesn't make sense. Like when you just like drink, when you're just drinking about 6 glasses of rum, like about 3 hours ago or something. It's but I think once you kind of switch that off, and it's because the show kind of is very self-aware of what it is, and like kind of is aware of these and just doesn't address it at all. Doesn't address like there's no night shift or anything. And I think because it doesn't really build that and doesn't try and focus on that aspect of it, it just means that like you can just accept it for what it is. And I think that's kind of a lot of what its appeal is, I think, as well, where it's just easy to watch, easy to fall in love with. Yeah,
definitely. I think that's exactly it. You don't have to think too deeply about what's going on in the background, or like when, because that's one thing that I often do with other shows is I'll sort of get too like locked into, okay, well, you know, we're seeing them at work or whatever they're doing, but hang about when they're at home, why would this happen and that happen? But with Death in Paradise, like you say, just kind of switch off from that. And also saying about so few police people, I always wonder as well what the commissioner is doing, because it seems to only be about 4 people in the police and the commissioner, and he's always really busy, or he's always like a bit angry or stressed. And in the first few series, like as the series go on, he pops up in it more and more, but the first few series he's hardly around, and it's like, what are you doing the rest of the time if they're the only police?
Actually, which is probably a nice segue to actually talk about the characters themselves and stuff. So, and So it first started, I think, was it 2011? 2011 when it first started, and it was Ben Miller. Ben Miller is kind of Richard Poole, with his very uptight, always wearing, like, refusing to not wear a suit, utmost professionalism, absolutely hating the place, and then like the usual kind of like the usual cop shows where they have to have a partner that contrasts. It's like the old kind of Dragonet template of having like a partner who's completely opposite of who the main character is, and it was with Camille, played by Sarah Martins, I think, like a no nonsense kind of like doing all the tough guy stuff, clashing through, and then you've got kind of Dwayne, played by Danny John Jules, and I've forgotten his surname. It's Fidel, isn't it?
Fidel. Yeah, Fidel's in the first few series as the other person working there.
Yeah, which is kind of like the young naive one. Whereas then you've got Danny John Jules' character Dwayne, who and they have the characters who do this role where it's usually someone who's lived on the island and pretty much knows everyone and is there for the exposition of saying, "Oh, who's this? Oh yeah, we've known this. That's Dave. That's Dave, the fishmonger, who's done this, and this." And that's the character who's always the kind of who's got all the island experience, the exposition character to fill in the other three about everything else and stuff. And it's kind of interesting dynamic. But I think key to its longevity, which I think a lot of British dramas seem to do, long-running British dramas seem to excel at, is the kind of Doctor Who method of swapping out the main character, and it then kind of it doesn't radically reinvent or make it feel different in terms of like Doctor Who, for example, but it does help kind of give a fresh kind of different take and stuff. So then we eventually get Chris Marshall as Humphrey Goodman turn up as the second one. Then we'll get Arden O'Hanlon as Jack Mooney for a couple of series, and then the most recent one, Ralph Little, who's actually the longest serving one, I think, playing Neville for like the last 4 or 5 series. So and they all going to have their own kind of unique takes to them. So
yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing. It's like it keeps it fresh, but it doesn't change. Like they're always a fish out of water, but in slightly different ways. I feel like Richard and Neville are cut quite similar, and maybe Humphrey and Jack a bit more similar to each other, but they are all different enough, but not so. They're always going to be a fish out of water. They're always looking for love. Maybe Richard less so, but they all seem to be like a bit hapless in their sort of personal lives, but you know, a good DI, and so they all have a lot of things in common. But luckily, the writers changed the characters just enough to give it a bit of a shake up. And it's kind of the same with the his who is Camille in the first series, but sort of the woman who is his kind of companion, as it were, not to use kind of the Doctor Who method too much. But yeah, she's always very similar, but like with Florence, she's sort of similar to Camille, but she is a bit different. And then like the two others that work in the police station, like Dwayne and Ruby, are both sort of a bit more like Devil May Care kind of vibes. And then there's always one who's very like straight down the line and very like Fidel and Marlon, like they take their jobs so seriously. And so there's always these specific characters, but luckily, like you say, they changed them enough to make it interesting.
I think the arrival of Chris Marshall, I think propelled the popularity of it. I think pretty sure I had this somewhere. So the first two series were around, like the first series was around like averaging around 5.3 million. And then series 2, you went up to about 7.6, but then I think series 3 was about 8.4. Series 4 was about 9 million. Then series 6 had about an average of 9.1 million. So I think that Chris Marshall's arrival with Humphrey kind of, I think, escalated it. So it's the David Tennant, like he's the David Tennant of Death in Paradise, I think, where it kind of like made it into the global force it was.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's sort of a lot of people's favourite DI, and I do really like him. I've would find it hard to decide who my favourite is, just because they're all quite different. And I feel like Jack always maybe gets a little bit overlooked, but he's brilliant as well, because I feel like he's the DI that most takes to life on the island and kind of gets involved with it and everything.
Yeah, I like that aspect of him. I think, yeah, it's easy to say he's probably my least favourite, a lot of them, but there's elements of him that I quite liked. But the telling bit was that I think about like within 5 minutes of Ralph Little turning up, like, and then you can just see like he's a mixture of Richard and Humphrey yeah, and he's just a lot more. He was a lot more entertaining as a character.
Yeah,
I think it's just saying like, I think the Jack Mooney years were a bit straight laced, and he wasn't. I don't think he was quirky enough. But but I do quite like the fact that he was so acclimated. Like he seemed to start knowing people more than I think it was Ruby who was the at that point who was the Dwayne character. So she was the gossip who knew everything. So which was a very different way of having a comic relief character that knows everyone. So so you can kind of see like quite enjoying the fact that they brought in the character of Ruby to replace Danny John Jules when he left.
I was quite disappointed when Ruby left, because it happened quite quickly. Like suddenly she like went to France to work with Camille, I think, and it happened. I wasn't really expecting it. It's like when Marlon left as well. I thought that he was going to come back, and I didn't think he was actually leaving the series. And yeah, I felt a bit disappointed. But now Dwayne's back. It's all good again. I'm fine as long as we've got Dwayne.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think he's probably saying something as well. I think the popularity of Dwayne, that Dwayne does came back in that. I think he came back for a Christmas special. I think Christmas special around series 10, just for a one-off, and then came back as a regular full time in then the latest series.
Yeah, it was quite nice to see him come back. And what's going to be quite interesting is I can't remember I should know her name off the top of my head, but the woman who was his girlfriend in an earlier series, and now she started working at the police station. Darlene, that's her name. Yeah, I feel bad for forgetting her name. It's just, I suppose because she's not been in it for as long. But what I really liked with that is, well, actually, interesting enough, I think that she played a completely different character. And then she came in as Dwayne's girlfriend, and then came in kind of working in the police station still as Darlene. And what will be interesting is we only had a few episodes of them working together. So it'll be interesting to kind of see more of that relationship.
Yeah, I think, and Darlene was perhaps not the kind of comic relief character, because I think that was still Marlon, because Marlon was still like the kind of like young plucky former thief. But Darlene was playing the role of kind of like a slightly older version of like Ruby. So Darlene was the I know everyone on the island, I know everyone's business, that Dwayne and Ruby had. So it'd be interesting to find that dynamic, but then it's a new interesting dynamic. Again, I really don't want to keep referencing Doctor Who, but it's like when they brought in Karen Gillan as Amy Pond, then then very, very quickly it wasn't just going to be the Doctor and Amy, it was actually Doctor Amy and Rory, which was actually a lot more of an interesting dynamic than just having. I think when everyone remembers the Amy and Rory period, they assume it was just going to be like the Doctor and Clara when it was just the two of them, when in fact there's a lot more episodes where it was the three of them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's the thing. I think when I got to the Amy and Rory bit, I thought it was going to be maybe a bit like Rose and Mickey, how Mickey is in a few episodes but he pops up here and there, but yeah, then the fact that it's kind of the three of them, I really like that. So maybe having kind of that history between Darlene and Dwayne will then slightly shake up the relationships of everyone in the next series of Death in Paradise in a way that potentially it needs, just to keep it fresh.
Yeah, and I think the mixture of the DIs I think is quite interesting as well. So you've got Camille, who's running kind of like the very kind of hard-nosed but kind of compassionate, kind of empathic, yet also takes no prisoners aspect of Camille. Then you've got like current Naomi, who's like the kind of boffin who will stay up researching stuff and other stuff. And then you've got Florence, who, if I'm completely honest, I can't explain. I can't give you any characteristics of Florence. I think she's actually, I think a lot of the characters she's my least favorite purely because I do think that she doesn't actually have a character until she comes back.
Yeah.
I think
No,
she's the
I
biggest
definitely agree with that. She's quite, even though I liked the fact that her and Neville kind of left together, and that was quite sweet for Neville. Yes, she maybe like Camille was so headstrong and really knew her own mind, and that was really good, especially kind of against Richard and also Humphrey as well. But I really liked her with Richard, and then Naomi as well. Like you say, you can describe her character straight away. But Florence, it's like, oh, she's compassionate, but she's a bit meek, but then also she does like she can fight back. So she's almost an amalgamation of so many things that it sort of watered out the character a bit.
Yeah, and I think they also tried to experiment with a perhaps less likable DI with Madeline, who's that, but her stint was very, very short.
Yeah.
And she does come across as quite unlikable, but I think that's probably because she was not with the right DI. So I think she probably would have worked better with perhaps either Neville or something, but perhaps Neville where you've got someone who's kind of like a lot like Camille, like times 10 in terms of like always pissed off at everyone.
Yeah.
I think she would have worked better with Neville there, but I think there's probably a reason that she's only in for very, very short amount of time because I don't think she clicked with the ensemble, but I do think that's probably because there was an experiment that probably didn't work as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. And I suppose with these long running shows, that's always going to happen at some point.
Yeah. I think, so if we, in terms of, so let's talk about Danny John Jules a bit more detail because we're going to have to. It's a Red Dwarf podcast, and that's the reason we're talking. The reason we're talking about Death in Paradise, I think, we're in the Shipwrecked Comatose group chat with the five of us, there's the argument being that it's very morbid, but I've always said people that it's the Guardian headline obituary, or that I always think of. So, for example, like when someone dies, what's going to be the thing that's in the Guardian headline when like the notification pops up? And like, for example, Chris Barry will probably say Red Dwarf and Gordon, British Empire actor. It'll be probably Red Dwarf first. But then like with Danny John Jules, we had the argument of being that I think Death in Paradise he's going to be known more for Death in Paradise than he does for Red Dwarf. So, in the very, 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 very far future, when he's like 110, when he sadly passes, it will probably be Death in Paradise and Red Dwarf. So Death in Paradise will probably be first.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you with that. And I think that's more to do with the fact that just so many people, like you were saying before, like 9 million people watched one of the series or multiple series of Death in Paradise. So just because of the fact it's so big globally and also in the UK, that I think that will definitely come first. But I think Red Dwarf would still be on there rather than other things that he's done would be in the body of the obituary, but those two would be in the headline.
I think British publications would probably put Red Dwarf first, but I think I was saying off air, like we spent quite a while trying to find a guest for this special, and we was trying like Facebook groups and stuff, and I was putting like I made a graphic of having the cat and Dwayne in a photo and saying, is anyone a fan of Red Dwarf and talks about Death in Paradise? And pretty much 99% of people were saying, oh, I'm not sure who the character on the left is, but I'm a massive fan of Death in Paradise. And talk about that. I haven't watched Red Dwarf though. Is that a necessity? And I'm like, yes. But I think that was from a group of people that was quite global, that they immediately recognised the character of Dwayne, but didn't know the character of the cat. And I think it's at the point now where I remember reading it's about 200 plus countries that Death in Paradise has been sold to. So, and it's like quite big and stuff. And it's so big that it's got a spin-off in Australia that we'll bring up a bit later on.
Yeah.
So I think it's a case that I think globally that Danny John Jules has kind of found his kind of global stardom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Through this. Mm.
Yeah, and I think, and it's easy to quite say why. I think that he's easily kind of the scene stealer, particularly throughout a lot of the episodes. He's the comic relief. There's a definite gulf, and you definitely feel it when he goes at the end of series 7. You can definitely feel the gulf, but there's just something about the character of Dwayne. One for all the Red Dwarf fans, it's a kind of whether it's an unintentional in joke or not, it's fun just to see him play a character called Dwayne. But 2, also, it plays on, I think, Danny John Jules' his kind of natural strengths as a comic performer. I think in the chat, Colin pretty much says that he's just playing himself, more or less.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny because I watched Death in Paradise the other day with someone who had seen little bits of it before but hadn't properly watched it, and it was a Humphrey series, one of the earlier ones, and he turned to me and was like, oh, he's just playing the cat. And it's like, I mean, there are definite similarities between the characters, but it's such a good, like you say, he's got such great comic skills, and he's such a great comic actor that even though I still really like the series of Death in Paradise that he's not in, I'm very pleased that he's come back, and out of all the characters who aren't DIs coming back, I think he's the best person to come back.
Yeah, I think probably not the breakout, probably not breakout. I think it is probably Chris Marshall's Humphrey that's the breakout star out of them. But I think particularly in terms of the characters that probably last the longest, it's probably going to be Dwayne. Who's not a DI, it's probably going to be Dwayne that's probably there as well. I think perhaps there's an argument for Camille, I think, at some point, because I think she's got the star power, like the character's got enough power to come back for the 10th anniversary as like the nice like shock appearance at the end of the first part of it, to come back for an episode and stuff. But yeah, I think just the way that Danny John Jules kind of just like seems to play himself and the cat, it's just like effortlessly, he's just very likable. I think Dan John Jules is just a kind of very likable person. I've met him once. I think I met him once because I got a photo with him many years ago, and I've got a signed picture that he signed as Dwayne Dibley, because this was, I think, before Death in Paradise.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was just very likable. He spoke to me for about a couple of minutes, and when I picked the Dwayne one, he goes, "I knew you was going to pick that one. I don't know how, but I just knew it and stuff." And yeah, he's just very good. Well, he's just very good with public as well, or not, but he's just a very likable person. I think that comes across in the characters that he plays. I think
exactly.
The Barrington in Maid and Marian is very similar.
Yeah, I think it like shines through, and I think for comic actors, that's, unless they're obviously playing like a really nasty character, but still comic. But I think for the characters that he plays, I think for those types of characters, it's such an important trait to have. You can just tell, like you say, you can just tell he's a nice person. And I think that's why with the cat, why I really like the character of the cat, like I said to you before, it's even though he's selfish and arrogant, he's really endearing. And that's probably Danny John Jules' like own endearing nature kind of shining through.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And I think I do think perhaps, particularly in Death in Paradise, I think there's perhaps elements of the personality of the actor playing the character that probably comes through in the character. And I do think that probably helps, particularly with the DIs. And I think there's probably, like with the history of what type of characters they've played and stuff, or their capabilities of anything that kind of shines through. So I think, for example, Ben Miller, I love Ben Miller. I think Ben Miller is very, very good. And I do kind of want to, I'd love to see him in a lot more kind of straight, serious role. Like probably more dark than this, but he's like kind of way of like acting, or perhaps his kind of like personality that's come across in other shows like Primeval, like works for the character of Richard Poole. There's, at the time of recording, it's not aired yet, but there's a new kind of comedy drama detective show called Ludwig, starring David Mitchell, that's been advertised. And you just see the trailer, and it's like, well, it's just David Mitchell in Would I Lie to You, but so it's just, so it's that kind of thing. It's that kind of thing where you just seem to like make a character around the actor.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, which is why I think it does work when they replace the DIs, because they kind of, like you say, Chris Marshall does such a different version to Richard, but in a way where it's not so different that it changes the whole vibe of the show. But it's like he's able to put his sort of twist on it, and the fact that they let them do that rather than just, it has to be another straight-laced DI. And if they went down that route, it probably wouldn't have gone on for as long as it has.
Yeah, and I think again with on Hanlon, I think they probably experimented with perhaps a lot more kind of down to earth, like quote unquote normal Di, who perhaps is probably but I think that there's a nice character arc with Jack where he's kind of mourning his recently deceased wife, and he's trying to kind of discover himself, and I think it's an experiment which I think it's interesting. It's just that I think that a lot of the times, I think when he's compared to other characters, I think he just loses something where there's not an element of quirkiness to it, which I think is a shame. I think perhaps I think with the Jack years, they perhaps could have worked on the supporting cast a bit more. I think, but then and then when you get to Neville, I think Ralph Little kind of. And I think there's a bit of Humphrey in this, where Humphrey's playing Chris Marshall, where he's kind of playing his My Family character with a brain cell. I think Ralph Little is playing Johnny from 2 Points with a brain cell.
Yeah,
more or less.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, but yeah, and actually, before we go, we only briefly mentioned him, but I think we do kind of have to briefly talk about the longest running characters, which are Catherine and the Commissioner. By Don Warrington, and I've suddenly blanked on the actress's name who plays Catherine.
I did have it up actually. Interesting enough, there's a tweet. Isabelle Bourgine, I think. Elizabeth. Yeah, sorry, it's right in front of me, and I still read it Isabel. Elizabeth Bourgine. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's like kind of like the mainstays of the character. I think it said. The Commissioner's kind of just there, just to kind of just. Like kind of just being your typical police chief. I want results and I want them there, blah blah blah. But I think as the show kind of moves on, like the relationship between him and the DI kind of changes, and I think they kind of must have said, oh, how do we keep Don Warrington's interest? And it says, oh, well, he had a bit of, it's not much, but he had a bit of a on-off relationship with Humphrey, and then they bring in Neville, and pretty much I think that's when they realise that they can play the Commissioner's character for more as he absolutely kind of scene steals when he his relationship with Ralph Little's character is one of the best things out of the Ralph Little years. I think he just constantly winds him up and just absolutely hates him, yet can't help but also respect him.
Yeah, there's almost like a disappointed dad vibe where it's like he doesn't like him but he loves him kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the thing that I've been noticing on my rewatch of now that I'm sort of rewatching early on, and like I mentioned to you before, he doesn't kind of turn up as much, and when he does, it's all about like results or it's all about kind of that they've arrested someone who's important on the island, and you have to make sure that he's definitely guilty, or my neck's going to be on the line kind of thing. But I do prefer it now in terms of the Commissioner's role, that we see more of him, we see him interacting with them more, and also they kind of gave him a bit more of a backstory because his the daughter he never knew about turns up, and we just get to know him a bit more. And then also obviously he gets shot, which spoiler for anyone that hasn't watched it, but that's quite a big plot point.
I think like a lot of the arcs that the DIs have, I think one of the big key arcs in the multiple arcs that I think Ralph Little's character has as well is kind of the grudging respect that the Commissioner kind of reluctantly wants to give. But then like there's I think I can't remember which series it was. It's probably like 11 or 12 when it's kind of like where Ralph Little's character, where Neville kind of gets framed, and then immediately the Commissioner's like, yeah, he might be an idiot, but he's not a but he's a smart idiot.
Exactly.
and immediately says, and I think the I can't remember who plays the DI brought in to kind of investigate him, but then he just basically goes, you just assumed that he was guilty without finding out the character of in it. So please get the hell out of my island. They basically do Peggy Mitchell type thing, but
no, that was nice in that. It was quite interesting, that bit actually saying about that part where he's kind of framed, because it was kind of interesting in a show that does have, okay, maybe it might have a bit of a through line of say Camille and Richard sort of will they, won't they, which never happens, but that kind of through line that they have, or Neville looking for love and Humphrey meeting his future wife. But it's quite interesting, those episodes where they have it sort of runs, the main storyline runs across a few episodes, so like with that, or when Florence's fiance got, again, getting shot, but those kind of sorry. Yeah. I guess people could, if they haven't watched it, just assume that everyone gets shot. But yeah, it's quite an interesting twist, that, of just, again, shaking it up, and then every now and again just a bit of a change.
Yeah, I think it's probably because I think the writers, I think the writing team, and I'm just assuming this, but from what I've gathered, particularly with the later series, is that I think they're trying to kind of keep things interesting and realise that perhaps having a slight more serialisation in terms of the character development, or a bit more opaque versions of that, will kind of work. And I do think that, particularly in the last couple of seasons, that I think it's spin-off Beyond Paradise, I think, has had an effect on the main one. So anyway, so for people listening, so basically, it's like the Paradise franchise is just growing. So we've got 2 series of Beyond Paradise, which sees Chris Marshall return as Humphrey, and his wife Martha, who's played by,
was it Sally Britton?
Sally Britton, yeah. Sally Britton, basically fish out of water, but this time he's in like a kind of like Cornish, like Cornish/Devon. I'm not exactly sure where, like a little fishing town.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because they've filmed it in Cornwall, but they've set it in Devon, and it's right. Like, they're really, it's almost like they've gone into one place and then been like, right, I'm gonna, like, they've gone to Cornwall, they've brought a scone, but they've put the jam and cream on the Devon way. It's like, of the 2 counties to do that in.
And I remember kind of watching it, and actually and I think in some aspects I kind of preferred what they do in Beyond Paradise to Death in Paradise, purely because I think that there are elements of Beyond Paradise I think are slightly having an effect on Death in Paradise, particularly with the serialization and stuff. But you can kind of see that the writers of Beyond Paradise are kind of feeling a lot more free, that they can kind of go beyond death, because there's no death in there. They've kind of been able to kind of expand on that, and kind of enjoy having stories that are slightly more like, they're not like, sometimes you'll get like the board, like every episode of Death in Paradise has the board and the names and everything, and you get that in Beyond Paradise sometimes. But like, you can kind of see like the climaxes are different, so it's not just a case of having the Poirot where the main DI says, "Oh, I know it," and has everyone come in to have like the 10-minute, but then like, and I think kind of, whilst Death in Paradise does that, I think Death in Paradise, particularly in late ones, where they kind of experiment with the way it works, like particularly in like the last episode where you have like 2 things running at the same time. I think Beyond Paradise has had an impact on that, where the writers of Death in Paradise are trying to now think of ways to kind of keep the formula but tell stories in an interesting way, which is why I think you start getting the couple of years before with the arc with where Neville finds I think Sophie and everything there, and I think the kind of Beyond Paradise effect is probably having an effect on that, to kind of make things more interesting, particularly now we're in kind of a more modern way of storytelling, where I think you need to have some elements of serialization.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of keeps people, because with the earlier versions of Death in Paradise, or the earlier series of Death in Paradise, even though there's a very, very loose sort of thread story arc going of, like in the first series, of Richard settling into life on the island, you could just theoretically drop in and drop out. And then, like you say, in the later series, you could do that, but you would miss quite a bit of stuff that's happening in the B plot, like with Neville looking for love and then finding Sophie, but getting, set up for murder because of that, and then Florence coming back. And so even though you could still dip in and out, you would miss certain things. So I suppose that, like you say, with the modern way of viewing stuff, it does keep people watching every episode rather than, oh, I'll watch this one but then I'll watch episode 4 and that kind of thing. And I really like with Beyond Paradise how it's really beautiful, but like you say, it's in the UK, so it still has that beautiful setting. But I really like how even though they've got kind of the story of the week, the crime, it's not always death like you said, but also it feels at times that the crime is the B plot and what's happening between Humphrey and Martha, like trying to get married or like they're trying to have babies in the first series and kind of the effect on their relationship. That's almost like the A plot that's running through.
Yeah. I think something you just mentioned as well, which I think we slightly kind of changed the topic section, which I think I've completely forgot about. I think we probably should have mentioned at the start, particularly with Beyond Paradise and with Death in Paradise, is that I think one of the key characters is the setting, is the locations. So with Beyond Paradise, you've got little villages that I can't remember the name of. Shipton Abbott, which is this fictional Devon town, which is kind of like nice. It's very kind of very blue, very cold, very cool, kind of colour filters and everything. Basically, it's the CSI New York thing, whereas you've got Saint Marie, which is very bright, very warm, very kind of got very earthy, kind of again yellow color filters. The CSI Miami filter, to kind of the look over it. But then like there's quite a few times, particularly in every episode, there's always kind of like location shots where to me it always feels like they've got the work experience kid driving this like drone, doing all the plane shots and stuff. There's all like. Every series finale of Death in Paradise ends with a drone shot just flying away from the beach house.
Yeah, that's so true, as well. Isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that the location is probably a key aspect of the shows.
Definitely, and I think actually that's probably one of the things that makes it so popular and sets those two shows maybe apart from other cozy crimes which do well but maybe don't get quite the numbers that these two do. And I do think having that setting is really important. I think because the fact it's shot on location and it doesn't like it's like not on set, it's shot in real life places. In the lead up to this, I was trying to find my Zoom background is actually a picture of Neville in. I was trying to look for like actual location shoots, and there are like blogs about people that have travelled to Guadalupe where it's filmed, and like the actual like buildings and locations that they film in there. So like cool.
So like the police station is it's a church hall next. So it's right next. So in real life, the police station is right next to a church on the Chates. I might be butchering the location of where they film it, but the city church is next to it, and the church hall is where they actually turn into the police station. And apparently if you visit out of filming season, like they basically turn it into a massive like a museum dedicated to the show.
Yeah, like doing the tours and like when people go to Belfast and do the Game of Thrones tours and stuff like that. Yeah, oh, that's cool because that's one day I would love to go there and see all the locations and stuff. It's like, I mean, it must be the dream job if you're an actor to get a job on Death in Paradise, because you get to be in the show and potentially be noticed by people sort of outside of the UK and might help to just get a few more fans, but also you get to go to this beautiful setting and have a bit of a holiday, on the days you're not shooting.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what attracts not only the main cast but the guest stars as well. Yeah. So it's picked up a couple of like not major film stars, but there's been quite a few kind of recognisable faces, particularly in the UK.
Yeah,
I've seen there's like quite a few people that you notice straight through. I mean, hilariously, Ralph Little was a guest star in Series 2 playing something completely different. Completely different. And I think the new lead, Don Gillette, who will play D.I. Mervyn Wilson in the new series. I think he played a character in like Series 1 or 2, I can't remember.
Yeah, he was in one of the earlier series, and I think, if my memory is correct, I think he may have been the murderer as well. I haven't got to the rewatch of his episode yet, but I'm sure when he was announced, I kind of looked him up, and then as soon as I was reading through his IMDb and stuff, and I was like, of course. I was trying to remember where I had seen him before, and I'd seen him on a few different things, but then the fact that he's been used in an earlier series, again, it's the Doctor Who, they do that as well, so
So yeah, but I mean, I'm not familiar with much of Don Delay's work, but I mean, do you have any idea or like predictions of where you think is going to go?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one, because obviously there's been 4 so far, and I do think even though they're all quite different, it's like you said, I always think maybe Richard and Neville are similar and Humphrey and Jack are similar, but actually, like you said, which I think is a really good point, is that Neville is sort of a mix of Richard and Humphrey, because he's got the not really settling into the island and the heat and all his like ailments, a bit like Richard, but then he's clumsy and stuff like Humphrey. But I wonder, because we've kind of come to the 5th one, whether Don Gillet is just going to maybe be completely different, potentially. I don't know if he's. I think it would be quite interesting. I think it would be funner if he wasn't so uptight as maybe Neville and Richard, just to be a bit different from Neville's character being the last one.
Yeah, I think he's 57 years old, so I'm wondering whether they'll play it as perhaps someone on the just wanting to do something interesting before he's retired or something, or on towards the end of his career, whereas like everyone else has been either in the middle of their careers. I think he's going to be the oldest that we've had. Going to be the oldest that we had as well. I'm just looking at his Wikipedia article. He's actually born in my hometown as well. So he's from Warsaw. Wow. So he's from Warsaw. So he's in the middle he's from the Black Country.
He I think that would be really interesting actually, because I hadn't thought of that in terms of age wise. So I wonder, because it was a bit for, I think also with Humphrey, but definitely with Richard, it was like the people he worked with in the UK were sort of ready to see the back of him. And then Jack, like you said, it was sort of the start of that arc of trying to get over, or sort of trying to deal with the death of his wife. So it could be quite interesting if maybe, because he's, like you said, either it's that he wants to change, or maybe it could be interesting if something's kind of happened to make him want to leave the UK or something at work. Not anything too dramatic or anything, because obviously it's Death in Paradise, but just a reason why maybe his sort of police department in the UK want him to sort of move away for a bit.
Yeah, I think he's also perhaps the first. It doesn't. This probably doesn't fit Ben Miller, but the majority of Ben Miller was actually comedy background, so I think he's the first actor, the lead, who's probably not primarily a comic actor.
Oh, that's
true.
Yeah.
So Ben Miller was like Miller and Armstrong, and he's very strong timing. Chris Marshall, like famously Nick in My Family. Arlo Hanlon was Dougal and my hero in Father Ted, and he was in My Hero. Neville Parker, Ralph Little. I keep getting the actors and the characters mixed up. Ralph Little. Royal Family, and 2 Points. I can't believe the name of that. 2 Points. Yeah, so the kind of like very much sitcom or sketch actors, or sketch comedy actors doing a kind of like comedy drama series. Whereas I think Dom Gillette, from the sounds of it, he's pretty much a dramatic actor. So I'll be very interested to see how that will probably define his character. Yeah,
definitely. It'll be interesting to see how he brings that much needed comedy element, which I think is such a key part of Death in Paradise's success, is having that comedy element with the DI, in a different way to like the Dwayne or the Ruby character. Because I've got up his IMDb at the moment, and when they announced him and I sort of recognised his face, I couldn't remember where from, and then I realised he had been quite a big part in EastEnders. I think he'd been in EastEnders for quite a while. But having just like a scroll through his IMDb and refreshing my memory, he's been, even though he hasn't been in many or potentially any comedy, he's been in loads of cozy crimes. So he's been in an episode of Midsummer Murders. He's been in, well, Death in Paradise already. He's also been in Shakespeare and Hathaway. So he's, funnily enough, been in a load of cozy crimes. So maybe that will kind of help because he's got the experience of that. Oh, he's been in Father Brown as well.
Yeah, so that's going to be quite interesting to see. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But it's probably going to be It's probably going to be Christmas, isn't it? Christmas special, probably when you see him, I think. So yeah, we're looking forward to actually watching my first Death in Paradise.
Yeah.
On Christmas Day and it'd be my second actually. No, it would be my second, but seen it.
It will be your
like,
year
with context.
anniversary.
Yeah, anniversary.
Yeah.
But in context, knowing all the backstory of everything. But yeah, and I think the DI casting is the big thing. So because we're starting to kind of get to the end of our chat now, towards the end of the episode. But and I mean, there's another question about the casting DIs that might be fun to do. But in terms of, before we get to that bit, I mean, do you have any kind of dream DI casting choices?
Do you know what? When they announced it, well, when I realised Ralph Little was leaving, or when the episode that he left, but before we knew it was Don Gillet, I was sort of thinking that it could be quite fun if a character like Camille, or at the time I thought maybe Florence, but I don't know, like you said before, her character maybe wouldn't have been able to be the main one. But I thought it could be quite cool if one of the sort of companions, as it were, came back as the main DI, so someone like Camille, which I think could be really cool. And yeah, I suppose thinking of comedy actors who would be quite good in it, I do think that's, yeah, who could be. I mean, I'm just thinking of comedians that I like now. I was going to say Jack D, who I know he did have a sitcom once years ago, but I mean, he would be like Richard Poole times 1,000, like really dour and just being Jack D, but it could be really funny, that kind of extremely morose and deadpan.
Yeah, I was trying to think of like I was kind of hoping that perhaps like they'll go towards a female DI, to try and mix it up or something. I was trying to think of different like actresses or something. Like part of me was thinking like whether like Arabella Ware from the Fast Show.
She would be good. Yeah.
I think perhaps perhaps almost like on the verge of retirement, going like that, or perhaps either Mira Sayal, I think. But then I thought Mira Sayal. Then I thought, you know what, Sanjeev Bhaskar might.
Oh, yeah. Do you know what? I think just before it was announced, I think his was one of the names that was going around as a potential. Yeah, I think he would be really good in it. Yeah. Yeah,
but I'm kind of hoping that, I kind of would like to see how they would go with like perhaps a female DI at some point, because I think again that's one of the things you probably do, try and mix things up, because you can then go through all sorts of different things from that.
Exactly, that's the thing. And then it would raise the question of kind of like, from a casting point of view, do they keep the second in command as a female character? Do they change it to a male character? So it could potentially shake it up a little bit with still keeping that kind of format. But the question is, are the audience ready for a female DI? Who knows?
I think we are. I think the audience would. And I'm not going to go on this SHIPWRECKED Comatose soapbox runs about it. I think that perhaps the Death in Paradise fan base would probably be more receptible for a female lead than perhaps a certain science fiction.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Certain little small sections of a certain science fiction franchise that we kept trying not to bring up, but
definitely. I agree with you. I think it would be great. That was actually my hope was, well, I suppose, as I said, like hoping they brought maybe Camille or someone. I think if they do, my one hope is that they don't suddenly decide to change the writing team and then write less strong scripts for the female DI.
Yeah, but I'm still trying to think about it. I wonder if like someone like Gina Bellman from Coupling might work. Wasn't that Sarah Alexander actually? I wonder if Sarah.
Oh yeah,
Sarah Alexander.
And, you know, I was just thinking Dune McKinnon, I think is how you pronounce her last name, who's in Two Doors Down and was in Smack the Pony. She would be quite cool. Yeah, I think there could be some great...
Yeah, I think this would be interesting way. It's just, it's a very kind of, it's surprising how versatile that you can probably think when you just think of an actor and just how different or their past work would work. So,
Yeah.
and I think the last thing we want to quickly do is I wanted to play a little kind of speculation game of how the Red Dwarf cast would be if they were cast as the DI. Now, unfortunately, I don't think we could get away with casting, Danny John Jules, but then again, else you'd have to make Dwayne the DI.
Yeah. Which, I'm going to be honest with that character, I don't think he would either want or be given that much of a promotion to become DI, but I don't think his character would want the stress of it. He just wants to, you know, drink rum and party and pick up ladies.
I do. One of the more memorable episodes, I think, of his first run was that when he kind of temporarily had to be the DS.
Oh, yeah.
He had to be the DS, and he came in with a suit and was seemingly he's like overdoing, taking it seriously and stuff. And then kind of like just realised how stressful it was and wanted to go back. But
yeah, definitely.
It'll probably I could probably see like an episode where he's probably the only person, like everyone else is incapacitated, and he's the only person to solve it. That'll probably
that
work,
would be funny. Yeah, that would be really good.
In terms of the other characters, so. I think out of the lot of them, the one that probably worked the best, I think probably Chris Barry might be interesting. Yeah, I think he'd probably be more of sedate Jack Mooney type, because I think just as a way of Chris Barry to kind of perhaps try playing someone less neurotic and.
Yeah, exactly. Because I suppose, I mean, if we're thinking of like the characters, I suppose Rimmer would be very much a Richard Poole type character, but actually Chris Barry probably wouldn't want to play it in the same way as that character. So then I completely agree. He would maybe do it in a bit more of a sedate kind of, more kind of settled into the island sort of vibes. I think he's probably the person, the actor out of the main, I'll say the main four, because obviously, as we say, I won't kind of include Danny John Jules in that, but of the main four, he's probably the one I could see in that role the most. I mean, I'd love Craig Charles to do it, just because I listen to his radio show a lot and I like him as an actor, but I feel like, as we were saying before, if their sort of real personalities are kind of shining through, it feels like Craig Charles would be very settled into the island, because for example, a lot of the music he plays on his radio show links up with the music that they play on Death in Paradise, and I've been seeing DJ once, and he's like a party animal, so it's like he'd just be loving life on the island, really.
I think perhaps the Craig Charles DI would probably perhaps clash with the Commissioner, because I'm assuming that the probably Commissioner will see him seeing it more of a holiday rather than as a long-term holiday rather than a serious kind of investigation. Whereas I think we think of Neville. Neville was pretty much there just because he was ill, then kind of like challenged himself to try and make it work. Whereas I think a Craig Charles DI will just be there like enjoying himself a bit too much and probably get on with Dwayne a bit too much, and then realise then like
exactly
then kind of like realise. Then it'd be interesting to have like a DI where the Commissioner's saying like, we don't he can do his job, but he probably could do it better. Yeah, and that like his arc would be to kind of take things more seriously rather than think, no, it's not a holiday, you're actually here to do serious work, which I think what Craig Charles would probably do. Yeah. So then we've got Robert Llewellyn.
Yeah. I've not, to be honest, I've not seen Robert Llewellyn in anything else other than Red Dwarf. So I can picture him less because I can just imagine him as Crichton because I don't know how else kind of to imagine him. So Crichton as a DI would be hilarious.
The actual the character of
yeah, just getting rusty because he's like too close to the sea and stuff. But yeah,
like dusting for fingerprints with his groinal attachment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he would be very good. He'd be very thorough, that's for sure. But yeah, no. What other what's his other main thing that he's kind of been in?
I don't know. I can't. You know what? I can't actually think of anything like fiction wise. You know what? I'm going to quickly do a last bit of on air googling in terms of his. He's been in. Okay, he's been in a couple of guest appearances. I think more than anything, he's been a voice actor but I think he's been a lot more of a host of things rather than.
Oh yes. Yeah. Oh, it looks like he's like you said, done a lot of hosting as sort of on Scrap Heap Challenge and stuff like that. And yeah, maybe seeing taking a look at him because I've done a little Google of him as well, and seeing him without his whole sort of costume on and everything. He looks like he would fit in quite well as a DI, but again, maybe a more Jack Mooney-esque kind of relaxed, enjoying the island, but a bit more, calmer.
Yeah, I think his Wikipedia photo with his glasses and kind of like receding hairline and kind of like aging stuff. It's just reminding me. It's just for some reason just reminded me. You know who I think will make a good DI? Ade Edmondson.
Oh yes, yeah, because Ade Edmondson was great in Jonathan Creek, another cozy crime show that I absolutely love. And yeah, he was good in that, but he would be he'd be a great DI.
Yeah, and I think as Shipwrecked Comatose are kind of pro Chloe Annette, I think, but unfortunately she has quit acting. I think Chloe Annette probably would have been a good DI. I think, for the female choice. I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think because I think we as a podcast team we just want to see more Chloe Annette on TV. Just because we just think she's criminally underrated. But yeah, so those are the kind of like speculations of the future DIs and stuff. And the only other perhaps thing to be aware of, it's currently airing in Australia, but it's not had an UK air date. At the time of recording, the second show in the franchise, Return to Paradise, has started airing in Australia. I've only seen a couple of the trailers so far. But I'm assuming they're going to wait until it finishes airing in the Australia. I'm going to suspect that they'll probably start airing it before the Christmas special. So I suspect we might see it on perhaps BBC Two or something.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious with this one. With Beyond Paradise, I was really looking forward to it because we knew sort of the main character, and also we had met Martha as well, and also it's like we've spoken about, it's different enough from Death in Paradise, but it does have the kind of story of the week and that kind of thing. With Return to Paradise, from what I've heard about it, is the series is kind of a whodunit across the series, and I don't think that it's got any, and especially not in the main part, the main character, it hasn't got any people that we've seen before in Death in Paradise.
I've read something which
has that been confirmed, or I think we might have read the same thing.
I think so, because I don't know whether it's actually, because I think there's been a mention of a certain character.
Right,
but I couldn't find whether it's aired or not because I think the main character of Return to Paradise has come back from London, and their boss was a character we might know.
Right, yeah. Perfect. Yeah, well, that will be good then because it would be nice to see to make it feel like it's part of the world or the part of the Paraverse as they're calling it. Yeah. But it would be nice. So that's good if other characters pop up. But yeah, the reason I'm sort of intrigued and not so sure, but also looking forward to it, so a bit of mixed feelings, is because I have a feeling it's going to be a bit darker and maybe a bit more like those. Probably not as dark as things like Line of Duty and Happy Valley and that kind of thing, but I think it's going to be less cozy crime from what I can kind of understand. Okay. But this is just me from what I'm reading stuff and kind of what I've picked up from it, so I might be completely wrong with that.
But I think the the Paraverse fan that I've become this in 2024 probably means I think I'll probably end up watching it as it airs. I think.
Yeah, I will definitely be watching it.
But yeah, and I was thinking about this. This wasn't in the Google Doc that I gave because I only recently just thought about it this afternoon. I was trying to think of any possible potential kind of like dream future shows in the franchise. And in my head, I suddenly had the words "Frozen Paradise," where a like kind of British DI or some reason ends up going to like, I don't know, like the Yukon in Canada or something, or kind of like some remote kind of like village in like somewhere that's permanently like snowy or something.
Yeah, definitely, because we've got like the summer in Saint Marie. We've kind of got the spring, I will say, in the Devon Cornwall area. I suppose Australia and Return to Paradise will be summer as well, but yeah, maybe a winter, sort of almost like a Fargo, like
Fargo,
but a much more kind of a much less dramatic Fargo, I suppose it would be, even though I love Fargo.
Yeah. Where like that, where you suddenly have like Richard Poole, like a Richard Poole type character who just has his suit, but also about 6 layers of like walking around in like mittens and a woolly hat or something. But
definitely.
Yeah, because I've got to, because I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that there's probably going to be more, or if anything, perhaps if not directly involved, spin-offs like Return to Paradise feels like I can probably easily see if like. Different language remakes like The Office did, so like a French version of the show or something, or so. But then again, though, you could easily go to a France set one and then suddenly have Camille, but then have it in French, because I think
that would be quite cool, like set in Paris or something, and it's following Camille. I would really like to see her kind of in her character again. So let's pitch that. Paradise in Paris, we could call it.
And I think we are due to. I think at this point now we are starting to have to kind of wrap up our arcs and then be sent off back to London and potentially and end up being replaced by, I don't know, the cast of Not Going Out or something, in a suit. But we are at the end of our chat, Jade. But before we go, people want to follow you and listen to Pod in Paradise. Where can they find you?
Yes, so Pod in Paradise, I've got a Twitter or an X account, which is Pod at Paradise Podcast, I think. Let me just double check that, because I set it up fairly recently. I've got it open here. I just want to check my handle. But I can tell I'm not a young woman anymore because I couldn't figure out where to find my Twitter handle. So it's pod_in_paradise. For some reason, Pod in Paradise must have already been taken. So pod_in_paradise. And then also I can be found on Twitter at Jade Gebbie. I always forget because I've got different ones for different sort of social medias, but just at Jade Gebbie. I think with Pod in Paradise, I took a little break just over the summer. I had only done 4, but then I went up to Edinburgh. So I'm coming back this week for my 5th episode, and I'll carry on doing the rewatch until the new series starts, and then I'll stop the rewatch and start a watch for the first time for the new series.
Oh yeah. But go and follow that, because it's quite nice, and it's quite nice to listen. It's particularly, I think I've not started rewatching them as I'm listening to, because I'm still kind of I'm still recovering from the binge. But it was nice to suddenly. I'm quite surprised actually when you started talking about particularly the first series, how much of it actually remembered. So when you started talking about it, I'm quite surprised at how much I remember from it. And like, I think it's like the second episode, I've still got the image of like the harpoon gun, mesh and stuff. And I'm quite surprised at how much I did remember from that, considering how much I ended up watching and stuff. But go and follow and give Pod in Paradise a listen. It's been like SHIPWRECKED Comatose approved. So, and before then, don't forget you can find me personally on X, even though I don't really use it as much anymore. So you can find me as Pick a Disc for the music podcast I do, and then Ask Us About Loom, which is the point-and-click adventure game podcast I also do. Pick a Disc is also the handle which you can find me on Threads and Instagram. Instagram's probably the best place to find me, particularly with Pick a Disc. And in terms of the podcast itself, because Mark doesn't seem to like Instagram, we have just got an X account, which is Red Dwarf Pod. So yeah, if anyone listens to this, and if you're a Death in Paradise fan, say hello. And if you're not a Death in Paradise fan, watch it, become a fan. Say hello. If anyone's got any thoughts about Death in Paradise, feel free to message me on Pick a Disc or Jade on pod_in_paradise. And yeah, that's it. And I think that is pretty much it for us. I want to say thank you ever so much, Jade, for donating some of your Monday evening stuff.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to talk about the show because as much as I love doing my podcast at the moment, it is just me, though I do want to bring on guests and stuff. So sometimes it's, I am just talking to myself. So it's nice to be able to chat with someone about my love for Death in Paradise, and also to be able to talk about Red Dwarf, which I love as well.
I was going to say that Shipwrecked and Comatose is part of the Film Stories podcast network. You can find them on Film Stories across all sorts of different platforms. Go and look at the magazine, look at the website, and follow all the different podcasts that we've got. With that, I've been Matt Latham. In a few weeks, you'll probably start listening to Series 12 coverage, and then we'll have the Promised Land stuff near the end of it. It's kind of weird that we get into the end of the show. But yeah, so I can't remember if there's a sign-off, apart from...
Shipwrecked and Comatose is a podcast brought to you by the Film Stories Podcast Network.
The show was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North.
The logo was designed by Carl Bryant, and the theme tune was composed and performed by me, Colin Jackson Brown.
I suppose I'm here as well, Matt Latham.
Follow us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and follow the network on Twitter at Film Stories.
Ma.